I always believed integrity would carry me through anything. After nearly a decade at the company, I'd earned a reputation as someone who never cut corners, no matter what. So when the CEO asked me, behind closed doors, to fudge some numbers on a call with a high-value client, I didn't hesitate to say no. I expected tension, not termination. Within an hour, my access was revoked, and security was escorting me out like I was a criminal. I thought my career was over. But just as I walked out the building, the CEO's phone rang. And everything started to unravel from there. The ride down the elevator was the longest one I'd ever taken. It felt like each floor ticked by slower than the last, and the silence between me and the security guard standing beside me was deafening. I had spent 9 years in that building, slowly climbing my way up from a junior account executive to a senior client strategist. I knew every corner of that office, every name in the directory, and nearly every client's birthday. And yet, I was being tossed out like I never existed, just for telling the truth. It started a week earlier when we landed a preliminary deal with Tech, a multi-million-dollar firm that had the potential to become our biggest client ever. I'd spent months nurturing the relationship. Late-night emails. Emergency presentations. Personalized solutions. I earned their trust, and with that, we got a foot in the door. But Tech's legal team had questions about our back-end automation capabilities. The truth was, we hadn't built the feature yet. It was still in development, and nowhere near ready to scale. When I presented the client's concerns during our internal meeting, the CEO, Alan Mercer, leaned back in his chair, cracked his knuckles, and said, "We'll just say it's in beta." Technically true. Tell them it'll be ready by Q3, and they'll sign. I looked at him, stunned. But Alan, that's not accurate. We haven't even moved out of prototype. Q3 is unrealistic, and they'll hold us accountable. His face dropped. The tension in the room shifted. My colleagues glanced down at their notepads, suddenly silent. "Are you questioning me?" he said, his voice low and cold. "I'm saying if we mislead them and can't deliver, they'll walk. Worse, they could sue. That's not a risk I'm comfortable taking." There was a long silence. Then he smiled, in that way people smile when they're trying not to explode. "You'll do what you're told. Or you'll step aside." I didn't back down. I told him, calmly, that I wouldn't be a part of misrepresenting our capabilities, and that he'd have to find someone else to deliver that message. 2 days later, HR called me in. No explanation. Just a cold, clinical termination letter and instructions to clear my desk. I wasn't even allowed to say goodbye to my team. My keycard was disabled before I reached the parking lot. But what Alan didn't know, what he couldn't have anticipated, was what came next. As I sat on a bench across the street from the office building, stunned and numb, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. "Hi, this is Jordan Marsh from Tech," said a smooth, polite voice. "We just had a scheduled call with your CEO, and something felt off. He said you were no longer with the company." My heart stopped. "Yes," I said carefully. "I was let go." There was a pause. Alan made it sound like it was a mutual decision. But based on the way he answered our questions, it didn't add up. He avoided all technical specifics. When we asked about beta progress, he used vague language. "You were always clear with us. Has something happened internally we should know about?" I could have danced around it. But I didn't. I told the truth. I was fired because I refused to lie to you. There was a silence on the other end, long enough to make me wonder if I'd just ruined everything. Then Jordan sighed. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "That tells me everything I need to know." That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, wondering if I'd gone too far. But in the morning, something incredible happened. My inbox, the one linked to my professional network, lit up with messages. First from Jordan again, thanking me. Then from another client who had heard rumors about shakeups at our firm. Apparently, Leveritech had made a few phone calls. Quiet inquiries. The kind that spread fast in the corporate world. By noon, a former colleague texted me a screenshot from the company's Slack. CEO in emergency board meeting. Leveritech cancelled their trial. They want an audit of every claim made during negotiation. I stared at the screen. My heart raced. Alan had underestimated two things: the power of transparency and how closely major clients value integrity. The unraveling had begun, and I wasn't even in the building anymore. Alan Mercer, the man who once strolled through the halls like he owned every dollar in the bank, was now tucked away behind closed boardroom doors with a legal team he hadn't used in years. I wasn't in the building anymore. I hadn't been since the day he fired me, but I didn't have to be. I was still connected to enough people who were texting me with whispers, screenshots, and wide-eyed emoji-filled updates. It turns out, Leveritech didn't just cancel the deal. They submitted a formal complaint to the board of directors. And they didn't stop there. They copied several other major clients in the industry, including a few we hadn't even signed yet. Their email outlined, in precise language, how the CEO of the firm had willfully misrepresented key product capabilities and praised a now-terminated employee for being the only one to offer honest technical assessments. That one sentence exploded like a grenade. The company's largest potential account didn't just vanish, it detonated public trust. Investors began asking questions. Partners pulled back. Legal advisors urged the board to act quickly to limit liability. Internally, panic spread like a virus. Employees were told to say nothing. PR scrambled to control the damage. But nothing worked. On the morning of the third day, I received a LinkedIn message from one of the board members. Just one sentence: "Can we speak privately?" I hesitated. Part of me didn't want anything to do with it. But curiosity, and some deeply buried sense of closure, pushed me to agree. We scheduled a call for later that afternoon. When the screen lit up and director Eleanor Strauss appeared, I sat up straighter. She was one of the few board members with a reputation for integrity. The kind of woman who asked the hard questions when others looked the other way. "Thank you for making time," she said. "I'll be direct. The board is conducting an internal investigation, and your name has come up repeatedly, in a positive light. I understand you were terminated after refusing to follow Mr. Mercer's directive regarding Leveritech?" I nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I told him I wouldn't lie to them. I told him it would backfire. And it did." She pursed her lips. "We've reviewed the internal emails. Your concerns were valid. You even suggested a modified timeline that could have been truthful. That option was never presented to the client." "No," I said. "He wanted the deal closed immediately, even if it meant false promises." She was quiet for a moment. "That decision is now costing us millions in potential revenue, and possibly more in reputation. We've temporarily removed Mr. Mercer from his operational duties while we review his conduct. Depending on what we find, the consequences may be more permanent." I didn't respond immediately. My emotions were a mix of vindication and sadness. It had taken years to build what we had, and just days to burn it all to the ground. Eleanor leaned in slightly. "You still have strong relationships with some of our existing clients. If the board were to consider reinstating you, or even promoting you to a leadership role in client strategy, would you be open to returning?" The question caught me off guard. I stared at her, unsure if I heard correctly. "After everything, they wanted me back?" "I'd need guarantees," I said finally. "No more pressuring staff to manipulate clients. No more protecting executives who break trust. And I want the freedom to run accounts the right way, ethically." She nodded. "That's exactly what we need." We ended the call on a respectful note. I didn't give her a final answer, not yet. I needed to think. But the conversation had shifted everything. I wasn't just the ex-employee who got pushed out for doing the right thing. I was the person whose integrity exposed the truth and sparked change. And Alan? Well, word got out fast. Someone from HR leaked the email announcing his administrative leave. His executive parking spot was reassigned. He tried to frame the situation as a temporary miscommunication, but nobody bought it. The staff saw through the charm. The clients had already walked. And the board? They were combing through every decision he'd made over the last 2 years. He hadn't just lost control. He'd lost credibility. The man who once told me, "You'll do what you're told or step aside," had now been pushed so far aside he couldn't even get past the front desk without an escort. And me? For the first time in months, I could breathe. The days that followed moved both fast and slow, like watching a storm pass through a window in slow motion but feeling every gust shake the walls. After the call with Eleanor Strauss, I gave myself time to think. Part of me was still unsure. Could I really go back to the company that had fired me for standing up? Could I trust them now, or were they just trying to save face until the storm passed? But then the text started. First from Marcy in accounting, "Did you hear Mercer's done? We're all rooting for you to come back." Then from Darren in product, "They're rewriting the roadmap based on the version you pitched to Laveritech. Looks like you were right." Even Layla, one of the newer hires I barely knew, messaged me saying, "Thank you. Because of you, we're finally allowed to push back when something feels wrong." I didn't realize how far the rot had spread inside the company until I started hearing from the people who had quietly been suffering under it. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Mercer tried to pressure. Others had simply given in, afraid of losing their jobs, their healthcare, their stability. But now, they were speaking up. And the company, or at least the people still in it, were listening. A week later, I sat down with the full board. The meeting wasn't at the office. It was at a neutral conference space, likely rented to keep things quiet. I walked in wearing a suit I hadn't put on in months, unsure what to expect. Eleanor greeted me warmly and introduced the rest of the board. Some I knew by name, others by reputation. None of them looked relaxed. These weren't people gathering to offer apologies. They were here for answers, for change, and perhaps to recruit me to help rebuild what had broken. "We won't pretend things were handled correctly," one of them said bluntly. "What happened to you should not have happened. We ignored warning signs, deferred to leadership without asking hard questions, and allowed short-term wins to cloud long-term risk." I nodded slowly. "So what happens next?" Eleanor looked at the others, then back at me. "We'd like you to return. Not in your old role. In a newly created one, Vice President of Client Integrity and Trust. You'd report directly to us. No more middlemen. You'd be tasked with rebuilding our relationships, advising our strategy, and creating internal checks so that no one else can be punished for telling the truth again." It was a big ask. I could have said no. I could have walked away, left them to clean their mess and started fresh somewhere else. But deep down, I knew this was my chance to fix things from within. To give voice to the people still stuck in silence. To make sure Mercer's culture of manipulation never returned. "I'll do it," I said. "But only if I have full authority to stop any deal that crosses ethical lines." "You have it," Eleanor said, without hesitation. What followed was a whirlwind of onboarding, meetings, and strategy overhauls. I was back, but everything was different now. People didn't avoid me like they used to, afraid I'd say the wrong thing to the boss. Now they came to me, seeking guidance, proposing ideas they used to keep buried. One moment stood out clearly. During a company-wide town hall, I was invited to speak. I stood in front of hundreds of employees and said, I was fired for telling the truth. Today, I've been asked to lead with it. That only happened because people, clients, colleagues, even competitors, refused to accept lies as the cost of doing business. Let this be the moment we stop tolerating silence and start rewarding courage. Applause wasn't something I'd expected. But it came, loud and sincere. Behind the scenes, Alan Mercer wasn't faring well. After the internal review, the board voted unanimously to terminate his contract for cause. That meant no golden parachute, no exit bonus, no cozy consulting agreement. He lawyered up, tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was overwhelming. Email trails, client complaints, even recordings from meetings he didn't know were documented. He went quietly, but bitterly. Rumors swirled that he was trying to launch a new venture, a stealth startup with a few loyalists. But the industry had already spoken. Leveritech's blacklisting carried weight, and nobody wanted to be the next brand to risk public humiliation over shady deals. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding. We reopened conversations with Leveritech. They weren't ready to return just yet, but they agreed to leave the door open. More importantly, they issued a public statement praising the board's decision to remove Mercer and commending the company for course-correcting in a transparent and responsible manner. Other clients followed suit. We didn't get back everything we lost, and maybe we never would. But the foundation we laid now was stronger, honest, and far more resilient. Late one evening, as I walked past the corner office that used to belong to Mercer, I noticed it was empty, stripped of all its arrogance and faux success. Just 4 walls and a window. I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I knew what we were building now would outlast every lie he ever told. Months have passed since that day I walked back through the company's doors, not as a victim of poor leadership, but as someone chosen to rebuild trust where it had been shattered. It hasn't been easy. Culture doesn't change overnight, and accountability isn't always comfortable. But step by step, we're getting there. The internal ethics program we transparency and decision-making. More importantly, employees now have direct, anonymous channels to raise concerns, and they're being used. Not because people want to complain, but because they finally believe their voices matter. Clients notice too. Some who distance themselves have returned, cautiously at first, then with growing confidence. They tell us the difference is visible, not just in how we speak, but in how we listen. That shift, more than any PR campaign, has helped us regain a reputation rooted not just in results, but in values. As for me, I've learned more in this chapter than I ever expected. I learned that telling the truth doesn't always protect you in the short term, but it protects something far more important, your integrity. I learned that when you stand firm, you might fall, but if you do, the right people will help you rise again, stronger. And maybe most importantly, I've learned that sometimes getting fired is exactly what you need to discover your real power. Mercer's name is now a footnote in a company archive. Mine? It's on a new mission statement, etched in the lobby wall beside the words, "Truth is the foundation of trust." We don't build anything here without it anymore.